From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. Indigenous Peoples Day commemorated across America. Algeria tells France to decolonize its history in new Spat. Targeting minorities was at the root of the terrorism industry in the United States. Taliban plan to fight Daesh without U.S. help. And a New Jersey teacher is accused of removing a student's hijab. Our top story tonight. Today marks the first time a U.S. president has officially recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. President Joe Biden on Friday issued a proclamation naming October 11th Indigenous Peoples Day. It will be observed the same day as Columbus Day, which became a national holiday in 1934 and is observed on the second Monday of October. Indigenous Peoples Day recognizes the history and contributions of Indigenous people, honors their place as the first inhabitants of the Americas, and what they suffered under European settler colonialism. This was Biden's first such presidential proclamation. He said the nation must never forget the centuries-long campaign of violence, displacement, assimilation, and terror wrought upon Native communities and the tribal nations. Numerous states, cities, and school districts across the U.S. already have declared the second Monday of October Indigenous Peoples Day. Boston and Philadelphia added official observances this year. In many places, the day has replaced Columbus Day. A new California law bans the sale of all off-road gas-powered engines. This includes generators, lawn equipment, pressure washers, chainsaws, weed trimmers, and golf carts. According to the Los Angeles Times, under the new law, these machines must be zero emissions, which means they have to be either battery-powered or plugged in. Mark Berman, the legislation's author, said it's a modest approach to limit the massive amounts of pollution such equipment emits and its health impacts on workers. The new law is expected to affect nearly 50,000 small businesses. California's budget includes $30 million to help professional landscapers and gardeners quit using gas-powered equipment. According to the National Association of Landscape Professionals, zero-emission commercial equipment is more expensive and less efficient than gas-powered equipment. A social media post by Olympian Ibtihaj Muhammad alleges a Muslim student in Maplewood, New Jersey, was assaulted by a teacher who forcibly removed the girl's hijab at school. Muhammad is the first American Muslim woman to wear a hijab while competing with the U.S. Olympic team. Muhammad said that the Seth Boyden Elementary second grader resisted by trying to hold on to her hijab, but the teacher pulled it off, exposing her hair to the class. Muhammad said stripping a child of clothing in front of classmates is humiliating, traumatic, and abusive. The South Orange Maplewood School District said it is investigating the allegation. Abdul Qadir Khan, celebrated as the father of Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, died Sunday at the age of 85. The nuclear scientist has long been hailed a national hero for transforming Pakistan into the world's first Muslim nuclear weapons power. This was in response to India acquiring nuclear weapons. Islamabad first carried out atomic tests in 1998 in response to tests by India. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan joined a chorus of voices lamenting the country had lost a national icon. Abdul Qadir Khan had a state funeral Sunday afternoon at Islamabad's Faisal Mosque. Flags were ordered to fly at half-mast. Khan's coffin was draped with a Pakistani flag as a massive crowd gathered to bid him farewell amid tight security. Thousands of people crammed into an uncovered enclosure nearby, praying in the downpour. 2 Palestinians were wounded Sunday while protesting the demolition of several historic Muslim graves in occupied East Jerusalem. Reports say that Israeli bulldozers not only demolished Palestinian tombs, but also desecrated and scattered the bones within. Locals gathered at the cemetery after hearing this. Anadolu Agency reports that an Israeli court had given the Israeli Archaeological Directorate permission to work on a site close to the graveyard. Ahmed Ad-Dajani, executive director of the Commission for the Protection of Muslim Graves, said among the graves demolished were those of Muslims who were martyred in the conflicts between 1948 and 1967. He said Israel would face legal action in response to the Municipalities Act. The West Bank and East Jerusalem are considered Israeli-occupied areas under international law. Thousands of Tunisians demonstrated in the capital Tunis on Sunday against a power grab by President Kais Saied. Anadolu Agency reports that demonstrators gathered in Hydraddin Pasha Street and marched towards Habib Bourguiba Avenue amongst a heavy security presence. Protesters waved banners reading Constitution, Freedom, National Dignity amidst calls for the release of activists and journalists held by authorities. The group Citizens Against Coup organized Sunday's protest. Its spokesman, Jawahar bin Mubarak, denounced the coup and invited people to join the protest. On July 25th, Said ousted the government, suspended parliament, and assumed executive authority. The majority of parties in Tunisia reject Said's seizure of power. Taliban leaders and U.S. officials met for the first time face-to-face in Qatar since American troops withdrew from Afghanistan in August. Afghanistan's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi said both sides agreed to uphold the terms of the Doha Agreement signed in 2020. Senior Taliban officials said they had positive discussions with the U.S. delegation and have begun meeting with European Union representatives. The 2020 U.S.-Taliban deal was negotiated by administration of former President Donald Trump. It demanded the Taliban break ties with terrorist groups and guarantee Afghanistan would not harbor terrorists. The Taliban has demanded its senior leaders be taken off the terror list. Taliban spokesman Sohail Shaheen told the Associated Press they won't work with the United States to fight Daesh. A group of 7 civil society and research organizations has released a detailed report on the impact and consequences of the global war on terror 20 years since its launch. Led by Georgetown University Project Bridges, the report is titled The Terror Trap: The Impact of the War on Terror on Muslim Communities. The report included a critical assessment by 30 international scholars of the US-led counter-terrorism efforts, its policies, and tactics. Among the topics explored are the history of targeting minorities in the US, the roots of the terrorism industry, and the role of Islamophobia in exploiting post-9/11 fears. The report addressed the restructuring of national security and surveillance, the use of torture, rendition, black sites, Guantanamo Bay Prison, and drone warfare. It also focuses on countering violent extremism programs, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, attacks on Muslim civil liberties, and the human impact of these policies. Algeria's president on Sunday demanded France's total respect for his country after rising tensions between the two nations over remarks by French President Emmanuel Macron. President Abdul Tebboune said that the return of the Algerian ambassador to France is conditional on France respecting Algeria's sovereignty, institutions, and power. Tebboune said France should forget Algeria was once a French colony. Macron stoked tensions with Algiers during a recent program. According to remarks reported by Le Monde, Macron told descendants of Algiers' War of Independence that the version of history transmitted to Algerians was not based on truth, but on a discourse of hatred towards France. Algerian Foreign Minister Ramtane Lamamra told France to decolonize its history. Volume of Islamic bond issuance is expected to increase over the next 10 years as African nations join other key Islamic markets, according to rating agency Moody's. Major bond markets include the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Massive amounts of financing needed to fund Africa's infrastructure deficit will be a key driver. The Islamic bonds are called sukuk in Arabic. Sukuk issuances in Africa contribute less than 0.5% of global outstanding sukuk. 2020 was a record year for sukuk issuance, dominated by the GCC at $205 billion. Moody's predicts that West African nations will lead in sukuk issuances. Egypt, Morocco, Sudan, Senegal, and Nigeria are best positions for growth in Islamic finance. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September. I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3.
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. In the report, The Terror Trap, 30 international scholars provide a critical assessment of the US-led counterterrorism. To discuss the report and more, we have with us Professor John Esposito. Let's go to Imam Abdul Mujahid, who will be interviewing him. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. With me is Professor John Esposito from the Georgetown University, who also founded and is leading its Bridges initiative. And they, in collaboration with many others, have come up with an extraordinary report about war on terror. War on terror, Afghanistan war is over, but war on terror seems to go on in the form of drone attacks, in the form of its impact on societies all around the world. Welcome, Professor John Esposito.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Tell us, what is the terror trap?
Well, the terror threat is taking a look at the way in which, when we now look back over 20 years, and of course, we've got the 20th anniversary, not only of 9/11, but we've just had the 20th anniversary of of what you might call the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, or the war in Afghanistan. And that was a driving motive. And then it had both international and domestic impact. So it's a major effort to say that, to look at those 20 years and have an assessment. And there are many who would argue that what we see is, in fact, a rather disastrous 20 years, both in terms of what has happened in the Muslim world. If we look at Afghanistan and Iraq, they basically were occupied or in a major way influenced, etc. All kinds of lives were lost in terms of both American lives and other Western military that were involved, but certainly enormous number of people died in Afghanistan and Iraq. And after 20 years, what do we have? If one does an assessment of the American involvement, the cost of life, the amount of money that was involved, the shattering of lives, was that worth it? And then it looks at the other issues that flow from that, the rise of Islamophobia and its impact, the trials and the domestic, as it were, a war on terror that occurred in the United States. The 80,000 people who were brought in, Muslims, Arabs and Muslims, to register, those that were interrogated, those that were imprisoned. But at the end of the day, in that early period, very few were found guilty of terrorism in that period. And it goes through many of the issues that arrive from this. Guantanamo Bay, which has been controversial for a long time. Past presidents have talked about, in particular, Obama closing it, but he wasn't able to. Trump said he wanted to not just keep it open, but fill it with more people. And we're now looking at Guantanamo, where more than 700 people, approximately 730 people, were imprisoned there. More than 700 have left. 98% of those that have not found guilty of anything. So it's all of those different ramifications that one is looking at.
20 years of this war on terror, and when I read papers, New York Times, Washington Post, or CNN, or Fox, there seems to be not much of a discussion about war on terror and its analysis, and your report seems to be a unique one. I remember there is a book on my shelf, Closing of American Mind. Are we no longer able to think through that what happened during this period? Did it hurt America? Did it benefit from America? So why there is not a broader conversation on this particular topic at our think tanks and our universities and in our media?
Well, I'm sure that there are lots of reasons, and there are people who are brighter than I am. But from my own perspective, I remember when the attacks took place, for example, in New York and in DC. And unlike my usual travel record, which is to spend a lot of time traveling internationally as well as domestically, for the next 6 months, I traveled around the country. And there was, clearly a very patriotic response that many felt, and felt America was attacked. I mean, that's exactly what Al-Qaeda wanted to communicate. They were hitting the symbols of American power, and it was a time for mobilizing and moving forward. But the question then became, how was that war actually? How did the administration actually move forward? We remember that that President Bush pressed Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, to give up, as it were, bin Laden, and basically Mullah Omar asked for proof. Well, we weren't ready for that. We had been attacked, and so you had, in effect, a military invasion of the country, and a toppling of a government, an occupation, and then a major presence of the United States, the American military, and support for then Afghan governments that basically were propped up by the U.S. and both have been proven to be incredibly corrupt. And at the end of 20 years, the question becomes, what actually has happened, either from the Afghan side or from the U.S. side? The same thing can be said with regard to Iraq. We needed a reason to go in. It was weapons of mass destruction. And then they weren't there. We claimed it was democracy. And one needs to remember that President Bush quite rightly said that in his first term, although America promoted democracy, we practiced democratic exceptionalism. That was the phrase that was used. But he pointed out that every administration before his had also, whether Democrat or Republican, done the same thing, which was true, that democratic exceptionalism. But the fact is, we didn't just go in and then eventually leave. What emerged early on was that we had our own candidate to be president. They were supposed to be setting up a parliamentary system. At a certain point, we actually intervened to change that parliamentary system. At one point, there was a law that was very controversial in Iraq, and the major American representative there, Ambassador Bremer, said it's not law until I say it's law. You had Ayatollah Sistani then bringing hundreds of thousands of people into a peaceful demonstration to basically demonstrate that this was their country, Iraq. In Iraq, what have we accomplished? No military great accomplishment. The fact is, a great deal of the country has been destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people, have died. So I think all of those things become important, and then you tie it in also with the domestic situation in America and other countries vis-a-vis Muslims, both in terms of Islamophobia, but also in terms of trials and imprisonment. So there's a whole part of the last 20 years that, in fact, what is being attempted here is to bring together 30 scholars that look at various aspects and attempt to surface this more, because there's been a reluctance to surface it. I'll just add one other comment. When Bush first came in, I had a phone call from some political appointees who were brought into the Bush administration to deal with the Middle East, as it were. And they asked me if I would give a talk and if I would help them put together a series of talks. And I asked why. And the person said, well, a number of us, we're talking to each other, and we've come in and we realize we're working on the Middle East, we're making decisions about it, and none of us really have any great background on it. Well, I think that there's an issue there. That doesn't mean that there weren't, certainly there were very people already in the State Department, but in terms of the people that were running the show, even those that should have known better, like Rumsfeld and Cheney, and definitely had backgrounds where you would say these people, had major positions in government even before this. The kind of advice that they gave the president was actually disastrous rather than productive. So I think that there's a lot for us to examine, and I think that there'll be more of that. This is just one effort. It's not the end all and be all. People will read it. Some people will be persuaded by it. Some people will still differ and want to argue about it. But I think that getting this kind of discussion out there and these kinds of issues will pull in others. We need not just to think that we can press forward if we don't look at where we've come from in terms of our foreign and domestic policy in the last 20 years.
Professor Esposito, what is the impact of this report so far? I mean, has it gotten any coverage from, say, New York Times, Washington Post, or CNN? I mean, in the mainstream, it seems there is hardly any discussion about war on terror. Of course, withdrawal from Afghanistan because of the horrible images which came out is there, but war on terror is still on, although withdrawal from Afghanistan has taken place. So why there is not much of a discussion on this particular topic?
Well, I think that first of all, and then hold that question for me and come back to it. I remember being invited during the war on terror in the early days to Great Britain to a closed meeting with military, etc. And as you know, we were allies at that point. It was Bush and Blair. But I remember that the senior military person, in giving a talk and giving a presentation, went out of his way to say that he was uncomfortable with the phrase war on global terrorism, because what did that really mean? What were the extensions? Where were we going to go globally? Any place? And how would you ever declare that the war on global terrorism was over? Terrorism is going to continue. It's continuing now. So is it that we have this ongoing war on global terrorism? In terms of this report, actually what's happening is it just came out on the anniversary date or right after it of the invasion of Afghanistan or going into Afghanistan. But in the next weekend, there are going to be a whole series of panels that will be advertised, that will be bringing together, and in the process of being advertised on the internet, bring together the authors that have been involved here and a discussion on these topics. How much traction they get remains to be seen. As I would put, I mean, when I look at it, having run Bridge, and we've been lucky enough to get to a point where we have 1.1 or 1.2 million followers on Facebook, which is the advertising, let's say, on the internet, which can be really very good. On the other hand, it very often it's quote, if you will, the dark side that usually winds up having the most money and the most influence, and the most think tanks and others who will then jump on and get their message out. So we'll have to see what happens. I think that there's no doubt that this is going to have traction, but I think that hopefully this is just the beginning of having an awful lot of other individuals take a look at it. There's a new book by somebody I think named Ackerman, which also is along these lines, and I've seen the author interviewed, and there are a lot of people who are very excited about that book. I think we're going to be seeing more of this coming out now.
From your perspective, or from the scholarship on this particular topic, do they consider war or terror is over? American had it? Because when discussion takes place on, say, comment section of any article on Afghanistan withdrawal, huge number of people are just sick and tired of that. So America being sick and tired of Afghanistan war, does it equate they're sick and tired of war on terror, or war on terror will go on?
Well, I think that I think many Americans feel that they're sick and tired of the idea of America being involved in a country and the trillions of dollars involved and what do you get at the end, but more importantly, the number of lives. Now, for many Americans or for many Europeans, they'll be thinking about their military, which they should, and the military lives, and be thinking, gee, if we had just gotten out, sooner, all of those people would have been saved. But one really needs to think during that period of time, as I said earlier, how many hundreds of thousands of people, Afghans and Iraqis, were affected, by our presence there. We're not over this at all, in the sense that terrorism will continue. We know that Al Qaeda is still out there. We know that ISIS is out there. We see ISIS, actually a wing of ISIS, causing problems in Afghanistan, but ISIS can be found. We've seen it in Europe, but ISIS these days is very active in Africa. So in many ways, I think the United States is going to have to figure out how we pursue where our interests are, but really think about what are our interests and what can we do. And we have to back away from, I think, the kind of mindset that existed before. And I think that President Biden, has done that. I think President Trump wanted to do it for all the wrong reasons, to pull back, because he was more interested in countries that had and would be buying all kinds of large, military stuff, like, the countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But I think that President Biden, sees the human dimension of it and the political dimension and the political costs. But we're going to have to, I think, take a real look at that. I think the other thing is one of the things that's come as a result of this war on terror is Islamophobia, and Islamophobia has now become global. It's not just that it's in the U.S. and in Europe, but it's in Myanmar, it's in China, it's in India, it's in Sri Lanka, and that's going to have to be dealt with. The images, the false truths, the fake news that's been out, that, to take Mr. Trump's phrase and use it in the reverse, we see a time when things are worse rather than better in terms of what's going on and its impact, that is Islamophobia, globally. All of those things we're going to have to take a much harder look at. And the problem is, at times people want to look the other way because China is one of the next powers coming online. A fair number of Muslim countries. How many Muslim countries have denounced what's going on in Myanmar, or have denounced what's going on to the Uyghurs in the loudest possible voice? And we need also, I think, the United States and the U.S. has been stepping up when it comes to the Uyghurs, but we need to see in the U.S. and in Europe a reaction both to what's going on in their own countries with regard to Islamophobia, but also what's going on internationally.
Would you say that Islamophobia, terrorism, and war, all three continue to reinforce each other?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think that, if you've got strong negative attitudes towards Muslims, let's say, whether domestically or internationally, and you believe that Islam, as some do, is a religion that supports terrorism, and you have CVE, combating violent extremism programs, whether it's in the U.S. or in the UK, that basically tends to too often compromise the mainstream Muslim community in terms of the way their monitoring of people that are innocent, the people who are brought in for questioning, the people who wind up getting prosecuted, etc. If you have that negative attitude, it makes it much easier for citizens, let's say in the United States, who are Islamophobic or far right, or Christian identity people. It makes it much easier for them when it comes to looking internationally to not care about what's going on. And in fact, to say, this is really a good thing, because we got our problems domestically, from these people. Now, things have gotten a lot better, I would say, in the U.S. and in a number of countries, in the sense that we now do live in a society where our educational systems, certainly, primary school, but definitely high school, college, and university, it's Islam and Muslims are very much part of the curriculum. That was not the case when I finished my degree in the 70s. There was no interest in Islam. And we've moved to a point where major professional organizations constantly, the Middle East Studies Association, the American Academy of Religion, both of which I was lucky enough to be president of, have had for now decades coverage and been involved with it. And we do see more, up to a point, more people in Congress, but that's gotten reversed in the last, I would say, 8 years at least, if not the last 12 years. The Newt Gingriches of the world, let alone the President Trumps of the world, the Rick Santorums of the world, the Cruzes of the world, who wind up identifying Islam and Muslims in a way that is suspicious. The fact that you could have a president of the United States like President Trump say Islam hates us, and one questioned about whether he means some Muslims or whatever. It was Islam hates us, and there are many of them. We don't know how many there are, and that's why we need to we need to monitor them. We need to have a Muslim ban, etc. I think that these things feed each other, and they also can lead to our being supportive of the policies that take place in other countries or looking the other way. What we have now is basically genocide that's been taking place in places like Myanmar, and in effect, we don't see that be covered, and we don't see enough world leaders speaking out against it.
Well, thank you so much, John. Truly appreciate you being with us. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Professor Esposito. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.